In the heart of South Africa, where ancient traditions collide with the fears of the modern world, there exists a creature so dreaded that many refuse to speak its name aloud after dark. It is whispered in trembling tones, feared in the silence of the night, and blamed for countless unexplained deaths that occur while victims sleep peacefully in their beds. This is the Tokoloshe, a small, hairy, dwarf-like demon whose presence has haunted African villages for centuries. Imagine the scene. A humble hut on the edge of a quiet township, a family asleep as the wind rattles through the grass roof. Suddenly, the shadows stir, and in the dim flicker of a dying fire, a pair of red eyes glow from beneath the bed. A clawed hand grips the mat, and before the dreamer can wake, a weight presses down on his chest. Breathless, paralyzed, his eyes fly open, and there it is. A monstrous little figure with matted hair, twisted features, and a sinister grin stretching across its deformed face. This is how the Tokoloshe strikes, and when morning comes, the family will find their loved one cold and lifeless without a single wound. To outsiders, the Tokoloshe may seem like nothing more than a folk tale, a myth told by superstitious villagers, but here in South Africa, the belief is as real as the ground they walk on. Generations have passed down stories of this creature, describing it as the servant of witches and dark shamans, summoned through forbidden rituals to spread terror and death. According to legend, it was born from curses placed upon restless spirits rising from rivers and swamps, or summoned from the ashes of ancient fires by those who desired power. The Tokoloshe is no ordinary monster. It is a creature of magic, a weapon of vengeance, and the embodiment of human fear itself. Eyewitnesses describe it as a grotesque figure, sometimes no taller than a child, with thick hair, bulging eyes, and a body twisted by evil. In some accounts, it can make itself invisible, choosing to reveal its horror only to those it wishes to torment. Victims describe waking in the dead of night unable to move or scream, their bodies paralyzed as a heavy weight crushes their chest. They feel claws on their skin, smell the stench of rot, and hear a low growl echoing in their ears. Then, when their families wake the next morning, they are found dead in their sleep, their life force stolen by the Tokoloshe. Out of fear of such attacks, countless South African families still raise their beds high above the ground, resting them on bricks or wooden supports. It is not for style or comfort, but for survival. For centuries, elders have warned, if you sleep too close to the ground, the Tokoloshe will come for you. And so, even in modern homes, this tradition continues, a silent reminder that some fears are too deep to vanish. There are chilling stories told by villagers who claim to have seen it with their own eyes. One man recalled waking in the night to find a small creature sitting on his chest, its glowing eyes staring into his soul. He could not move, could not scream, could not breathe. When he finally managed to blink, the creature was gone, but the terror never left him. Another woman swore that after angering a neighbor rumored to practice witchcraft, she was visited night after night by a shadowy figure that scratched at her windows and whispered her name, until she fled the village. Tales like these are endless, and they have made the Tokoloshe a permanent part of African folklore, a warning that evil does not always come in the form of towering monsters, but can arrive small, cunning, and impossible to escape. Even today, the fear persists. The Tokoloshe is spoken of in schools, in churches, in bars late at night, when conversations drift into the supernatural. Some laugh nervously when the name is mentioned, but the laughter fades when someone recounts a fresh story of an unexplained death. To many, the Tokoloshe is not a myth. It is real, it is alive, and it is watching from the shadows, waiting for the moment when you are most vulnerable, asleep in your bed, unaware that something ancient and merciless has crept into your room. The truth is simple. Those who believe in the Tokoloshe sleep with their beds raised, and those who do not risk never waking up again. For centuries, the story of the Tokoloshe has been whispered from the lips of elders to the ears of children, carried across generations like a dark inheritance. To truly understand the horror of this creature, one must return to its origins deep within the fabric of African folklore. Among the Zulu, the Xhosa, and several other South African tribes, the Tokoloshe is said to be more than just a mischievous spirit. It is the embodiment of curses, a being created through the darkest forms of witchcraft. In the old days, when disputes between families grew bitter, or when jealousy festered like a wound, people would not always confront their enemies directly. Instead, they would visit the Sangoma or the Inyanga, the traditional healers who held knowledge of both medicine and magic. Most of these healers were respected figures who worked to cure illnesses, bless crops, and guide communities. But a few, consumed by anger or temptation, turned to the darker path. They became witches and sorcerers, wielders of fear, and it was these witches who could summon the Tokoloshe. With a ritual as dangerous as it was forbidden, the witch would draw strange patterns in the dirt, mix herbs with blood, and chant to the restless spirits that linger between the living and the dead. Out of the smoke, they claimed, a creature would crawl, small, twisted, and eager to serve. Once bound to its master, the Tokoloshe would obey every command, whether it was to frighten a rival, bring sickness to a household, or even strangle a victim in their sleep. The witch did not need to stain their own hands with blood. The Tokoloshe would do the work for them. This made it the perfect weapon, invisible to outsiders, impossible to defend against once it had chosen its victim. Some stories say the Tokoloshe is born from the water, emerging from rivers and ponds under the command of witches. Others claim it rises from the ashes of ancient fires, molded from earth and shadow, given life by dark incantations. However it is created, one truth remains the same. It is always tied to human malice. The Tokoloshe does not simply wander the world looking for prey. It is summoned, directed, unleashed. In this way, it represents not only a monster of folklore, but the darker side of human nature itself. A reminder that envy and hatred can call forth demons in more ways than one. Villagers recount chilling tales of neighbors who mysteriously prospered after a rival fell ill, of families who claimed to see a small shadowy figure lurking near their huts after arguments erupted, of children who suddenly died in their sleep after their parents quarreled with someone known to dabble in witchcraft. Such events kept belief alive, and the fear of witchcraft became inseparable from the fear of the Tokoloshe. The power of this creature lies not only in its violence but also in its cunning. Some claim it is capable of shrinking itself to the size of a finger, slipping through keyholes or cracks in the wall, entering a home without a sound. Others describe it as invisible, its presence felt only in the sudden chill of the air, the sensation of being watched, or the crushing weight that presses down upon you at night. There are even stories that witches keep the Tokoloshe as a companion, feeding it milk or blood, treating it as both servant and pet. In exchange, the creature carries out their darkest wishes. This twisted relationship blurs the line between myth and nightmare, leaving villagers uncertain whether the Tokoloshe is a physical being, a spirit, or something caught between the two. The folklore warns that once summoned, the Tokoloshe cannot be easily dismissed. It grows attached to the home of its victim, stalking them night after night, feeding on their fear until they weaken. Only a powerful Sangoma, one who walks the path of light, can banish it, using rituals of purification and protective charms. But even then, it is said, the Tokoloshe lingers nearby, waiting for another call. Another master, another chance to crawl back into the lives of the unsuspecting. In this way, the legend of the Tokoloshe is not just a monster story, but a reflection of the constant battle between healers and witches, between good and evil, between the power to cure and the power to destroy. To many South Africans, the Tokoloshe is proof that the unseen world is just as real as the visible one, and that behind every shadow, there may be a presence you cannot explain. Imagine lying in your bed, hearing footsteps on the dirt floor though no one else is awake, feeling a cold hand brush against your skin, smelling a foul odor that has no source. These are the signs that the Tokoloshe has been sent. And the terrifying truth is this: once it has been called to your home, once its master has unleashed it upon you, there is almost nothing you can do to escape. The Tokoloshe is perhaps most terrifying not simply because of what it does, but because of how it is described by those who claim to have seen it. In village after village, among stories told by trembling witnesses, its appearance takes many forms, yet all of them inspire dread. Some say it is a small hairy dwarf no taller than a child, with rough skin like bark, knotted hair and teeth sharpened into jagged points. Its eyes, often described as glowing red or yellow, shine like embers in the night, piercing through the dark as if it feeds on fear itself. Others claim it has missing features, a nose that seems carved away or sunken eyes that leak shadows instead of light. Some whisper that its tongue is long and black, capable of slithering across its victim's face as it crouches on their chest, choking the life from them. There are accounts that describe it as hunched and deformed, its spine bent into unnatural shapes, its arms too long for its body, dragging on the ground as it walks. And yet the horror does not stop there, because the Tokoloshe is not bound by a single shape. In certain tales, it is able to shrink itself, becoming no larger than a thumb, slipping unseen into homes through cracks in the wall, climbing under blankets without ever being noticed until it is too late. In other versions, it can grow taller, stretch its limbs, or vanish altogether, turning invisible until the moment it strikes. This shifting form makes it impossible to predict and, worse, impossible to defend against. But the physical form of the Tokoloshe is only the beginning of its terror. Its powers reach far beyond what the eye can see. Folklore insists that the creature has control over sleep itself. Victims who encounter it are often struck with sudden paralysis, their bodies frozen in place as though weighed down by chains. They try to scream, but no sound escapes their lips. They try to move, but their limbs betray them. All they can do is lie there, helpless, while the Tokoloshe climbs onto their chest, its small but heavy body pressing down with the weight of stone. This suffocation has killed many in their sleep, leaving families to discover lifeless bodies in the morning with no visible wounds, only the chilling suspicion of what happened in the night. Others speak of the Tokoloshe feeding not on flesh, but on the soul. It drains life force, leaving survivors weak, feverish, or plagued by nightmares that repeat until they wither away. A few escape death, but are never the same again. They walk through life pale and broken, whispering about the thing that visited them, but unable to convince others of their suffering. And yet, the Tokoloshe's cruelty does not end with suffocation. There are stories where it delights in torment, scratching at doors and windows, whispering names in the dark, or laughing in a voice too small and too shrill to belong to any human. It has been blamed for missing children, sudden illnesses, and outbreaks of madness. In some cases, entire households claim to be attacked, each member waking in turn to find the creature perched upon them, only to vanish when they cried out. And then there is the most sinister aspect of all. The Tokoloshe does not always kill immediately. Sometimes it toys with its victims, visiting them night after night, letting them wake each morning drenched in sweat, too terrified to sleep, until exhaustion consumes them. Slowly their minds unravel, and when death finally comes, it feels less like a strike of fate and more like the conclusion of a game the Tokoloshe had been playing all along. Its powers are said to extend beyond the physical world into the spiritual. Many believe the Tokoloshe can curse its victims, attaching itself to their souls so that even after leaving a village, it follows them. Protective charms and rituals are often performed to sever this link, but the fear persists, because once marked by the Tokoloshe, few ever truly feel safe again. Some claim that it can even manipulate emotions, stirring anger, jealousy, or despair within households until families turn against one another. In this way, the Tokoloshe becomes not just a killer, but a destroyer of harmony, sowing chaos before taking lives. The method of attack varies depending on the story. Sometimes it is summoned by witches to punish a rival, arriving in silence to steal away a victim's breath. Other times it is described as wandering freely, drawn to those who are weak or who sleep without protection. Children are said to be particularly vulnerable, their innocence attracting the Tokoloshe like a moth to flame. Parents warn their little ones never to sleep too close to the ground, never to ignore strange sounds in the night, and never to mock the name of the creature, for speaking of it without respect is believed to invite it into the home. And yet, despite all these warnings, attacks continue to be reported, feeding the cycle of fear that keeps the legend alive. There are tales of villages where people constructed their beds high on stacks of bricks, not out of poverty but as shields against the Tokoloshe. In such places, visitors often wondered why every house seemed built the same way, until they were told the chilling reason. The bed must be lifted high, for the creature does not climb easily. To sleep close to the earth is to invite it to sit upon you, to let it press down until your breath leaves your body forever. This cultural detail, this small act of survival, remains one of the clearest signs of how deeply the Tokoloshe has embedded itself into daily life. In modern times, skeptics try to explain these stories with science, linking them to sleep paralysis, night terrors, or even natural causes of sudden death. But among those who believe such explanations are meaningless, too many have seen the eyes, too many have felt the weight, too many have heard the whispered laughter in the night to ever doubt again. The Tokoloshe may be dismissed as a legend by scholars, but to the people who raise their beds, who whisper prayers before they sleep, who avoid certain rivers after sunset. It is as real as the darkness that falls each night. The most disturbing part of the Tokoloshe legend is not the ancient folklore itself, but the countless real-life stories told by people who claim to have suffered its presence. These are not just tales repeated around a fire, but personal accounts whispered with trembling voices, confessions given in churches, and even testimonies recorded in newspapers when the unexplained deaths became too many to ignore. One such story comes from a small rural village in KwaZulu-Natal, where a man named Mandla swore that his brother's death was no accident. He told of how his brother had angered a neighbor accused of witchcraft, and only a week later, the brother began complaining of strange dreams. He said he felt something crawling under his blanket, pulling at his toes, whispering in a language he could not understand. At first, the family laughed, thinking he was simply tired or ill, but their laughter faded when, night after night, he woke screaming, drenched in sweat, pointing at the corner of the hut where no one else saw anything. On the seventh night, his cries stopped. When the family woke, they found him lying still, eyes open, his face frozen in terror, his mouth twisted as though he had tried to scream, but the sound never came out. The village healers declared it the work of the Tokoloshe, and to this day, his family sleeps on beds raised high above the floor. Another chilling account comes from the Eastern Cape, where a young woman named Namsa recalled her childhood fear of sleeping alone. She described how, as a little girl, she would hear scratching sounds against the walls of her room, sounds like small claws dragging slowly, deliberately, as though something was waiting for her to fall asleep. One night, she woke to the sensation of a weight pressing on her chest. She opened her eyes and saw a small, hairy figure crouched on top of her, its red eyes glowing in the dark. She tried to scream, but no sound came and her body would not move. The creature leaned close to her face, its breath foul, its mouth opening to reveal sharp, uneven teeth. She remembered the way it laughed, high-pitched and cruel, before disappearing in a blink. When she told her parents, they believed her instantly, for many in their family had their own encounters with the Tokoloshe. To protect her, they built her bed on thick bricks, sprinkled protective herbs around the room, and called a sangoma to bless the home. Even so, Namsa admits that decades later, she still wakes at night, afraid to look into the corners of her bedroom. There are also reports that reach far beyond villages, stories that spread into the cities, proving that the Tokoloshe is not confined to rural superstition. In Soweto, a mother of 3 insisted that her children were being stalked by something invisible. Every night they would wake crying, clutching at their throats as if something was choking them. At first she suspected asthma or nightmares, but doctors found nothing wrong. The fear grew worse when one of her sons began describing a little man with glowing eyes who sat on his bed and whispered threats. The boy was only 5, too young to invent such horror. Desperate, the mother called in a sangoma who confirmed her worst fears. The Tokoloshe had been sent by someone jealous of her family. After rituals and cleansing, the attack stopped, but she still raises her beds to this day, terrified that the creature may one night return. Not all encounters end with death. Some leave scars of another kind, when scars of the mind. A teacher from Durban recalled her time as a student when she lived in a hostel. She and her roommates often heard laughter at night, soft and mocking, though no one else was awake. One evening, she felt something pulling at her blanket, dragging it off the bed. When she turned, she saw nothing, yet the blanket slid slowly to the floor as if invisible hands were tugging it. Terrified, she moved to another room, only for the same thing to happen again. The hostel eventually gained a reputation for being haunted, with many students claiming they had seen a small shadow darting across the halls at night. Whether it was truly the Tokoloshe or mass hysteria born from fear, no one could say, but the stories spread, and the name of the creature was whispered with dread among the students. Some of the most horrifying reports involve entire families attacked. One tale speaks of a household in Mpumalanga where 5 people died within 2 months, each found lifeless in their beds with no sign of struggle. The local community was certain it was the Tokoloshe, sent by a witch who had a long-standing feud with the family. In fear, neighbors began raising their beds and lighting fires at night, hoping the smoke would drive the creature away. Journalists came, skeptics argued about medical causes, but the people of the village had no doubts. They believed they had witnessed the wrath of the Tokoloshe firsthand. Even today, Police reports occasionally contain bizarre testimonies. Officers have admitted to being called into homes where families insisted something invisible was tormenting them. Though the law cannot write Tokoloshe attack as a cause, the whispers travel fast and the legend grows stronger. For many, these modern testimonies prove that the Tokoloshe is not just an ancient myth fading with time. Instead, it is alive, adapting, and haunting the present as much as the past. And what makes these stories so powerful is the consistency, the paralysis, the suffocation, the laughter, the glowing eyes. Whether told by villagers in remote huts or by children in urban homes, the details rarely change. It is as if the Tokoloshe has a signature, a pattern, a way of marking its victims that transcends distance and culture. To dismiss these accounts as coincidence or imagination is easy for outsiders, but for those who live in fear, they are proof enough. Proof that somewhere in the shadows, just beyond sight, there is something small and malevolent waiting for the right moment to crawl into their rooms. These stories, collected and passed down, ensure that the Tokoloshe remains more than folklore. It remains a living, breathing terror, one that continues to claim victims and will not be silenced, so long as people believe, fear, and whisper its name in the dark. But perhaps the most chilling element in the story of the Tokoloshe is not only its hunger for souls, but its reputation as the perfect assassin for those who dare to wield dark magic. Because while outsiders may see the legend as a harmless bedtime tale meant to scare children, in villages across South Africa, elders still whisper that witches and sorcerers use the Tokoloshe as their servant, binding it with rituals so sinister that even the bravest fear to speak of them aloud. For it is said that if a man angers his enemy, and that enemy seeks revenge through the occult, the Tokoloshe may be unleashed, creeping silently into the victim's hut, suffocating them in their sleep or driving them mad with terror until they waste away. And in these stories there is no doubt that the Tokoloshe is not just a random monster, but a weapon, a curse given shape and form. There are countless tales of feuds between neighbors where one family begins to lose members mysteriously, and the surviving villagers insist that only a Tokoloshe could have done it, summoned by the hatred of another. Sometimes entire communities have been torn apart by accusations of who called the Tokoloshe and who was cursed, proving that this belief is not harmless but deadly in its own way. For fear itself can kill, suspicion can break bonds, and superstition can ignite violence. But why the Tokoloshe, one might ask? Why this small twisted demon instead of any other spirit or ghost? The answer lies deep in African cosmology, where spirits can be bound into the physical world, and the Tokoloshe is considered one of the most dangerous forms of these bound entities. Some say it is created when a witch mixes human blood with ashes and calls upon the restless souls of the dead, twisting them into flesh once more but without humanity, leaving behind only a creature of malice that obeys its master until it is released. Others say the Tokoloshe is a wandering spirit that attaches itself to people who harbor hatred, jealousy, or greed, drawn to negative energy like flies to a corpse, feeding on their emotions until it fully manifests. This makes it not only a creature of magic but a mirror of human flaws, a reminder that our darkest desires can bring nightmares into reality. And yet, no matter how one explains it, the Tokoloshe remains the same. A monster that attacks while you sleep, leaving no wounds but stealing breath, sanity, and peace of mind. There are even darker accounts whispered only in hushed voices that speak of Tokoloshes not merely killing, but tormenting their victims night after night, sitting on their chests, clawing at their skin, whispering blasphemies until they beg for death. Imagine lying in bed unable to move, hearing something shuffle at the foot of your mattress, and then feeling its weight crawl slowly up your legs. Cold fingers wrapping around your throat as unseen laughter echoes in your ears. Such is the horror that generations have passed down, and the tradition of raising beds is only one of many defenses said to keep the creature away. Elders instruct children never to leave food out at night, for the Tokoloshe is drawn to offerings of milk, beer, or meat, and if it grows accustomed to feeding in your home, it may never leave. Charms made of herbs, bones, or blessed objects are often hung at doorways, and spiritual healers are called to cleanse houses where people feel its presence. Yet even with all these protections, the Tokoloshe is said to return again and again, slipping through cracks in walls, traveling unseen like smoke, and waiting until the household believes itself safe before striking once more. Its persistence is perhaps its greatest weapon, because unlike other monsters that appear and vanish, the Tokoloshe does not simply attack and leave. It stalks, it lingers, and it breaks its victims over time until nothing remains of them but fear. And when the Tokoloshe is finally done with one victim, it moves on to the next, carrying its curse across the land. This endless cycle of dread has made it a permanent figure in African horror, one that embodies not just death but paranoia, reminding everyone that evil can come in the smallest, most unexpected form, and that sometimes the deadliest predator is not the beast that roars in the wild, but the shadow that creeps silently beneath your bed in the stillness of night. But the darkest and most disturbing aspect of the Tokoloshe legend lies not only in its terrifying presence at night, but also in its reputation as a creature bound to human will. For this is no wild monster roaming the earth without purpose. It is often described as the obedient servant of witches and sorcerers, summoned through twisted rituals and commanded to destroy enemies. And this is what makes it far more dangerous than any ordinary spirit. Because while some monsters act on instinct, the Tokoloshe carries out deliberate missions of vengeance. Imagine a village feud where one man insults another, or where jealousy burns in the heart of a neighbor, and instead of words or weapons, dark power is used. The witch prepares a ritual of blood and ash, whispering incantations in the dead of night, calling upon restless souls to rise from the shadows, and what emerges is a small, hairy, dwarf-like creature with eyes like fire and claws like knives, ready to obey its master's orders. Once unleashed, it slithers silently into the victim's hut, creeping across the floor, climbing onto the bed, and pressing its weight upon the sleeper's chest until they cannot breathe, paralyzing them as it drains away their life. In the morning, there are no wounds, no marks, nothing but lifeless eyes staring upward, and the family whispers in dread that the Tokoloshe has come. These stories are not confined to one region but spread across entire communities, and with each retelling, fear deepens. Families point accusing fingers at one another, believing that the monster was sent by someone with hatred in their heart, and sometimes entire villages collapse under the suspicion of witchcraft. The Tokoloshe becomes more than a monster. It becomes a weapon, a curse, and a symbol of how human malice can take form and stalk the night. Some traditional healers describe its creation in horrific terms: a mixture of human blood, grave dirt, and ashes, fused together with forbidden spells until a restless spirit is forced into a twisted body, condemned to serve its master in exchange for the taste of human souls. Others say it is not created but drawn, a wandering shadow that thrives on jealousy, anger, and greed, attaching itself to those emotions until it takes on flesh and bone. Either way, the Tokoloshe is not just a nightmare. It is a mirror of humanity's darkest emotions, proof that hatred itself can become a living, breathing horror. And the methods of attack are not always instant death. Some victims are tormented night after night, the Tokoloshe returning again and again, scratching at windows, whispering their names, crawling up their bodies and leaving them sleepless, trembling, and half mad with terror until their strength collapses and death comes like a final release. Those who survive such encounters often describe the same dreadful experience, waking in the middle of the night unable to move, feeling a crushing weight on their chest, seeing glowing eyes hovering inches from their face, and hearing guttural laughter that echoes even after the creature vanishes. Imagine lying there trapped in your own body, your lungs screaming for air as something unseen sits atop you, its claws grazing your skin, its foul breath hot against your cheek, and knowing that you cannot cry out for help because your voice is stolen and your body is chained by invisible hands. This is why generations have feared the Tokoloshe more than any wild beast in the forest, because it strikes in the safest place of all, the bed, the place of rest, the sanctuary of dreams, and turns it into a battlefield of terror. Families still cling to protective rituals passed down by ancestors, raising their beds high on bricks so the creature cannot reach, sprinkling protective herbs around doorways, and calling spiritual healers to drive it away. Yet the Tokoloshe is said to be relentless, slipping through cracks, traveling in smoke, hiding in shadows, and returning even after it is banished, waiting until its prey lets down their guard before attacking again. It is not only death it seeks, but domination, a slow erosion of courage until the victim becomes nothing but fear itself. And so the Tokoloshe has become an eternal figure in African horror. More than a folktale, more than superstition, it is the embodiment of dread, a reminder that evil does not always roar with the strength of giants, but can arrive in the shape of something small, twisted and patient, a creature that waits beneath the bed in silence, ready to crawl into your nightmares and steal the last breath from your lungs while you sleep. And so, when we look at the legend of the Tokoloshe, What begins as a simple tale of a dwarf-like demon haunting villagers at night unfolds into something far deeper, for it is not merely a monster story told to frighten children, but a reflection of human fear, guilt, jealousy, and vengeance, all given physical form in the shadows of South African nights. The raised beds, the whispered prayers, the charms hung on doors, all of these are proof that belief in the Tokoloshe still shapes daily life, weaving ancient dread into modern existence. And whether one views it as myth, spirit, or psychological terror, its power cannot be denied. Imagine the countless generations who have sat around fires listening to elders tell of glowing red eyes peering from beneath blankets, of victims who awoke paralyzed with something clawing at their chest, a feud settled not with fists but with curses that sent unseen assassins in the night. These stories have built the Tokoloshe into more than folklore. It has become a cultural truth, a living idea that transcends the boundary between superstition and reality. Perhaps the most terrifying thought is not whether the Tokoloshe exists as flesh and blood, but whether it matters at all, because its presence in the human mind is undeniable. Fear is a kind of spirit too, one that can crush, suffocate, and even kill. And the Tokoloshe may be its perfect symbol, an embodiment of how terror itself takes on a life of its own. Think of the countless people across South Africa who to this day refuse to sleep on the ground, who raise their beds and keep protective charms by their side. Whether or not the Tokoloshe is truly there, the fear already has power, already dictates how they live. This is how myths endure, not because they are proven, but because they are believed, and in belief lies strength. If a man dies mysteriously in his sleep, the Tokoloshe is blamed. If a family is plagued by misfortune, whispers arise that a neighbor may have summoned it. And if a child wakes screaming in the night, trembling with visions of claws and glowing eyes, parents comfort them with warnings passed down for centuries. Thus, the Tokoloshe survives not just in shadows but in the human heart, generation after generation. Perhaps it is a spirit, perhaps it is sleep paralysis, perhaps it is something science cannot yet explain. But for those who have felt the crushing weight in the night, explanations mean little. The terror is real. And so the story circles back to its beginning. A quiet night, a bed too low to the ground, a sleeper drifting into dreams, and somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes watching, waiting, crawling closer with every heartbeat. The Tokoloshe is not gone, it never was. Because whether or not it walks the earth in physical form, it will always live in the stories, in the whispers, in the minds of those who believe. And even in the minds of those who laugh at the myth but still hesitate to let their feet dangle off the bed in the middle of the night. That hesitation, that chill crawling up the spine, that fleeting thought that maybe, just maybe, something could be under the bed. That is the Tokoloshe's victory. For monsters do not need to be seen to exist. They only need to be feared. And as long as the legend survives, as long as people whisper its name in trembling voices, the Tokoloshe will never die. It will remain eternal, crouching in silence, a shadow that slips between myth and nightmare, waiting for the moment when darkness falls and you, unsuspecting and vulnerable, drift into sleep. And if you wake in the night paralyzed, your breath stolen, your body heavy as if something sits upon your chest, do not try to scream. Do not try to move, because perhaps you are no longer alone. Perhaps the Tokoloshe has finally found you, and by the time dawn arrives, it may be too late.